Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Wild Portishead Live. Good evening, Chris. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. I've had a very exciting day. I was nest checking over at the Yakning Congsbury Wildlife Action Group.
Oh,
It's 25 years, virtually to the day, that they bought their first field.
brilliant.
25
Yeah.
years since we've been going there.
Now you
Quarter
say,
of a century, for goodness sake.
I know you say 25 years ago. In my mind, I think to myself, well, that's got to be 1980 something or other. No, 25 years ago would have been the late 1990s. It's a terrifying thought, isn't it?
Yeah,
Oh,
and
yeah,
still the same old crew there, and they're doing great guns, and they're getting hopefully some more land as well. But
brilliant.
this is another one of our election specials, isn't it?
It is another one of our election specials, and without further ado, we would like to welcome tonight's guest. It's Liam Fox. Hello, Liam. How are you?
Good evening, Liam.
Oh,
No sound.
A long day's campaigning, so
yep. You were muted there for a second. So, how are you doing anyway?
very well. I reckon I've walked about 70 miles, according to my phone, so far in the election. So, as I said, I'm quite enjoying a seat in the garden. So, thank you very much for giving me an excuse to stop for half an hour.
That's fine.
That's a wonderful background there, Liam.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Well, you've been here in this garden, Chris. You've seen this, and what we're looking at behind me is basically just rock. So the garden, we're very lucky here where I live in Tickenham. We've got this particular habitat. We've got the woods just to the side of me, and then we've got the lawn. So currently we've got two deer roaming in the garden, and we have the first rabbits that we've had for quite a while have returned, having been completely absent. They're back. They're back with a vengeance, digging holes in the front lawn. So.
Rabbits are incredibly important managers, and I know plenty of farmers up north in Cumbria who blame the absence of the rabbit on the bracken. Really interesting.
Well, it's just good to see. We've seen over this summer, we've seen a lot of bees, the return of the rabbits. We've seen a lot of animals this year. It's got to be a good sign. And if you remember, it's not that long since we were having a bee crisis, and quite a lot of beekeepers here in this part of Tickenham, and we had a project for all of us to scatter, like the area behind me, scatter wildflower seeds just to create more of a natural habitat. So for 2 or 3 years, we all let our back gardens go wild, and the bee population has recovered very well as a consequence. And it's a very simple thing, and it's a good reminder to people that you can do quite a lot for regeneration just in your own garden, however big or small that is. It doesn't take a national policy to do it, and we can all do it ourselves. So it's amazing, and the number of bees that we got when our trees in the front were in blossom just a couple of months ago was amazing. It was good to see.
Really good. And that leads me on nicely then to ask, and we're going to do this with every candidate that we get coming through. We did it last week with the Green Party. Do the same thing with you. And I've got to do a disclaimer at the beginning, Liam, and that is basically Jonathan and I are not journalists. He's not Mr. James O'Brien, and I'm not Nick Ferrari. So there's no catch-outs here. It's a friendly chat.
Yeah.
And basically the question that will lead us off for the next 20 minutes is, what do you feel that's really special about the North Somerset natural environment? And should you be elected, what will you do for it in terms of either protection, enhancing, etc.? You've already mentioned one thing there, which I think is absolutely excellent. Over to you, sir.
Well, this constituency is unique in one particular respect, which is that North Somerset constituency, not North Somerset district, but North Somerset constituency is 40% of the land mass is green belt, and 30% is floodplain. And so the green belt for me is probably easily in my top three issues, and in all 8 times that I've been elected so far here, protected was right up there. And you would think that that wasn't really under threat. Um, but even within permitted development, you can get it. So you've got the Roots project up in Abbotsleigh at the present time, and I think it's horrible to see what is pristine meadow being destroyed. Nesting skylarks were being disturbed, and I think it does represent a threat. So one of the things that I'm focusing on and would focus on in the next Parliament is how we need to look at the law relating to planning to ensure that loopholes in what is permitted development are not allowed to, through the back door, destroy some of our pristine green spaces. That for me is a big issue because Greenbelt is there for a purpose. It's there to stop urban sprawl. It's there to protect the countryside and wildlife. But there are some gaps, I think, in the law that need to be plugged. And in the last Parliament, I was lucky enough to get two private members' bills. One I used on for Down syndrome legislation, and the other for compensation for people who had problems with National Grid and the pylon. So if I was lucky again, I'd want to be looking at how the law could be amended so that we don't get what are called permitted developments, but by any other means would be regarded as excluded developments.
You mentioned that one of the things you mentioned in there was floodplains. What about development on the floodplain? Because I mean, I travel up and down the M5 at the moment quite a lot, too much. What I'm seeing is what I call creeping development in areas that I would have said in the winter are going to be pretty darn wet.
Well, I think, Chris, the clue is in the term, isn't it? What do you think is going to happen on a floodplain, and why would you build houses there? We've got a number of developments, especially the development that sits in the strategic space between Nailsea and Backwell at the present time. That, for me, is a recipe for flooding because the access road, which would be immediately as you come through the bridge at Nailsea and Backwell station, would have to be raised. And that's going to create flooding issues, I think, for a lot of the neighbouring lands. And in concert with North Somerset Council, for once, some would say, we have been very much fighting to stop that development happening because I think it's exactly the wrong sort of land. We know it floods, it is floodplain. And people who buy houses in these places will, I think, have a problem, not just with the flooding, but much more with their insurance. So the changes to the National Policy Planning Framework, which came into effect in December 2023, are designed to make it much more difficult to build on floodplain. And I think that has to be the simple, common sense way forward.
Brilliant, brilliant. Jonathan, you got a question?
Yeah, viruses. I understand you're writing a book about viruses, aren't you?
No, I've just written a book, Jonathan, about water.
Water.
I am also my next one is going to be on viruses, but
That's
the
it.
publishers, so close to the pandemic, didn't think that people really wanted to read any more about the subject. But by the magic, I do have a copy of the book here. It's called "The Coming Storm: Why Water Will Write the 21st Century." And it's a long-standing interest of mine from my interest as a doctor, from my interest in my time in defence and security, and also in my time in trade. And the book's really written in four parts for the different interests I have. The first is about the natural world and how humans evolved out of water, and what our relationship with the natural world is in terms of that. And of course, there's some quite startling new information available about that. And I've not long come back. At Easter, I was in Gibraltar with one of the world's top experts on Neanderthals, and we now know that Neanderthals were much more skilled in water than we expected or knew. But there are gaps in the evolutionary story. For example, humans do not have primate kidneys. We've got kidneys that are much more closely related to water mammals. than they are to primates. And the theory developing, I think, is that we must have spent a lot of our evolutionary time in water, probably around estuaries where the highest proportion of protein per square meter exists. And that would also explain why we stood up so quickly, if it was assisted by the non-gravitational impact of water, and also our neurological systems developed faster because of very high access to omega-3 that we would have got from a high seafood diet. Second part of the book is about conflict relating to water. 40% of all the people on our planet today get their drinking water from a river that arises off the Tibetan plateau. That's the Indus, the Ganges, Brahmaputra, Yellow, Yangtze, Mekong. And China now has control over the headwaters of all those rivers. So if there is competition for water, you can see the potential for conflict. Third section of the book is more related to the work I do with WaterAid, the charity, and concepts of clean water and clean sanitation. To cut a very long story short, we could give everybody in the world access to clean water by 2030 for a tenth of what we spend annually globally on alcohol, just for example. And the fourth and final section is about pollution and climate, and how we need to understand how all of these elements are acting together. We tend to not see the wood for the trees, and we talk about bits of environmental policy without seeing the single most unifying part of that, which is water. And only 3% of the water on our planet is fresh water. Most of that's locked up in the poles or in Tibet. And we've got the same amount of water for 8 billion people today that we had for 1 billion people 150 years ago. So it's been a bit of a labor of love, sort of writing the book. And it's had very good reviews. Andrew Marr gave it a great review. Andrew Roberts, the writer. But my favorite one so far was actually The Big Issue. The Big Issue did a 3-page spread on the book this month. And I thought, of all the reviews I've read of it, it was a really thorough and really good review. It's not a political book. It's trying to get people to waken up to how water as an issue needs to be tackled, and the fact that 3.5 million people die from waterborne diseases every year, and this in the 21st century, and 2 million of those are children. And again, in the book, when you talk about these numbers, they're too big for people to really get their head around, but that's the equivalent of people dying of waterborne diseases. It's the equivalent of 3 9/11s every day, or 6 Titanic sinkings every day. And for the number of children who die, it's the equivalent of 18 Boeing 777s crashing every day. And when you start to put it in those sort of terms to people, I think they can begin to understand better the sort of challenge that we face. It can be done. I set out in the book what we need to do from an international perspective, and I hope people will take an interest in what I think is a narrative, a story around water that I think is often told.
I think at the moment, I think water is certainly a hot topic in this country because of what's going on with water quality. In fact, Ruth, we got viewer Ruth has said, so what have you done about water quality in the UK? We have a crisis here at home, which I think is a fair question, because we're hearing stories all the time.
It's a problem. It's not a crisis. And we've just had, for example, in Clevedon, we've just had the Environment Agency declaring the quality of the water there as good. So, but there's a problem, and there will be an increasing problem if we get increased the sort of rainfall that we had last year, and we've not got sufficient storm drain infrastructure in place. The problem is how you get that money in. Before the water industry was privatized, the average investment per year in current prices was about 2.6 billion a year. Since then, it's been about 6.2 billion a year in current prices. No party in this election is talking about taking it back into public ownership. So the question then becomes, how do you get more money into the investment in infrastructure and less into dividends? And that's a question I think that the regulators need to look at. But to put it into perspective, comparing Britain with, say, some of the rivers in Europe, the river Danube, Europe's second longest river. Even last year, when we had all those floods and all that water being untreated sewage being into the water system, we were still producing 1/1400th of the level of pollution that's in the Danube in a normal year. Just to give that as an example, I mean, a third of the population of Belgrade use septic tanks, and that's dumped untreated into the Danube, which is the equivalent of 60,000 Olympic swimming pools of untreated human sewage being poured in there. So we do have problems in the UK, but we have to try and keep them in perspective, and having an international range of comparisons, I think, is a good thing.
Oh, I think the thing about that is a lot of people will say, but we weren't dumping sewage into the waterways with the kind of the volume at the moment. That in the last, there were periods when actually we cleaned up our waterways. We seem to be going backwards of having polluted rivers again. That can't be right, surely.
No, we've got very rigorous standards on that, and last year was a heavy rainfall year. But it's definitely true that if we're going to be in a climate change system where the water cycle is effectively speeded up or has more energy, we're going to see more very wet periods like we saw in 2023, and we need to adjust our infrastructure accordingly. And I think it's a good example of what I was writing about in the book, that we need to understand the impact that this will have on a whole range of different systems, and we will have to adapt and invest more because it's not a static system. We're looking at a water system that is changing. The evidence is all there for us to see. So that will have to change. I think the answer is that less money goes in dividends to shareholders and more money goes into investment in better infrastructure. But having said that, again, comparing Britain with other countries, we actually have a very good record.
In terms of one of the things that you said in there was climate change. You mentioned climate change, and you mentioned borne diseases as well. And I think we've got a new disease on the block, folks. I'm afraid the British Trust for Ornithology have just put out that blackbirds. Now, we've been through trichomoniasis with our finches, with our great tits, with our blue tits. Now we've got this one. Jonathan, you're going to have to help me pronounce this, I'm afraid. You got it there, have you? So,
yep, it's Usutu. I think it's Usutu.
Yeah, so it was originally discovered in 1959 in South Africa, and it's arrived in London in 2020 and caused around about 39% drop in the blackbird population. It's quite a significant disease. Now, the British Trust for Ornithology are asking everybody to have a look at their website. You can sign up, and basically they're working with DEFRA and the disease people to monitor blackbird populations. So I've signed up for this already in my garden. Liam, you can do this as well in your garden, and Jonathan, you can do this in your garden. We can lead the way here. Tell everybody.
I'll sign up to that happily.
Brilliant. So basically, this is a virus which is attached itself or has a relationship with a mosquito, and then it affects the bird. I don't know much about viruses, Liam. Over to you.
Well, we're seeing as we're seeing warming of the climate, we're seeing some species of mosquito moving north, and one of them carries a disease for humans, dengue fever, and we've seen dengue fever now in about 22 European countries, and that's because the Egyptian mosquito, the species of Egyptian mosquito that carries the virus, is able to survive in countries further north. We will see that the third section of my book's very much about how changing patterns of disease are inevitable if you're getting alterations in climate, and that in turn is likely to have impacts on human health and human migration. I think that it's really interesting that you raise that example in terms of birds, because we're seeing a number of potential viruses leaping from birds into mammals. We've seen H5N1 in South America, and that's been appearing elsewhere. That's a disease which is a much higher fatality rate in humans than, say, COVID did. And we need to be watching the potential spread of that very, very carefully. So yes, all of these things are related. And I think that for me, the main thing about writing the book was to join up the dots. People will talk about the security elements of water, or the climate elements of water, or the pollution elements of water. They're all part of the same single problem, and we need to focus much more on them. And interestingly, you would have thought, or I would have thought, that your most basic human right was your access to clean water, to drinking water, and to sanitation, and yet it's number 4 in the UN's sustainable guidelines, sustainability projects. And I'd have thought you could live without democracy if you had to, but you can't live without clean water and sanitation, at least not very well. So I think internationally there's a question of what our priorities really are and what they should be.
It just seems to me that especially our bird population, and obviously you mentioned bees earlier, just getting hit for six time and time again with things. So we've got habitat which we're losing at quite a rate, be that development or whatever. And now we've got diseases coming in which are dramatically affecting them. You mentioned bird flu there. There's some horrific scenes last year from I think it was right around the Scottish coast, of seabird colonies absolutely decimated by this thing. Now, the question to you then, as a doctor, would be: do we need to create vaccines for everything, or is a virus basically like any other part of the natural world? It might affect something for a while, but it doesn't want to wipe itself out. It settles down.
Viruses evolve. They're part of the natural world. The oldest bacteria that we know in the world are about 4 billion years old. The oldest viruses we know are about 400 million years old. Humans have been around for about 200,000. So guess who's winning the evolutionary race in some of these? And we're still relatively early on in our understanding of them. But one ray of hope there is that we discovered during the COVID pandemic that we could actually, once we'd discovered the genome of a virus, we could actually produce RNA viruses relatively quickly. It's not really the place to discuss it, but I think that we've not really, since the pandemic, worked out how we would be able to, on a global basis, produce those vaccines sufficiently quickly and in sufficient numbers to be able to react much better to a global pandemic than we did with the COVID one. So there are positive things out there, but you have to recognize that viruses and bacteria are part of the natural world. Bacteria, we couldn't live without. It's partly what keeps our skin sterile. It's partly and clean. It's partly what enables us to digest our food. And it seems to have an increasingly important, or we're understanding increasingly, it's important in the development of our immune systems. So the next time people want to buy things that kill 99.9% of all germs, we should maybe just remember that we are in partnership with these parts of the natural world too.
Again, I'm looking at the scene behind you now. Is that red valerian behind you?
Yes, I think it is.
It is, isn't it?
Hmm.
So that's all of that behind you, Liam, has come up naturally. You've not put anything in, or you did say earlier you seeded some of it.
We had. So we have a bit of a domestic battle. My wife likes it to look neat and tidy, and I like it to look wild. So as you can see, we've got a bit of a compromise going on here.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Jonathan, you got a question?
I'm just trying to. It's interesting that Liam, you've spoken of climate change as being an absolute certainty. There are a lot of people out there who will try and argue the toss that there is no such thing as climate change, that the climate naturally changes over the millennia and whatnot. But tonight, you've actually spoken of it as an absolute certainty. Is that a correct reading of what you've been saying this evening?
It is. So when Boris Johnson very kindly gave me a bit more reading time by removing me from his cabinet when he first became leader, I decided that I was going to sit down and read as much as I could about climate. And so first of all, you can't pretend that climate change isn't happening, because it is. All the evidence is there. We've seen the rise in sea levels, for example. We already had about a 30-centimeter rise, with about another 30 centimeters to come. A lot of people don't realize that water expands as it gets warmer, and so as the temperature goes up, you can't stop the water expanding. So even if we were to deal with all of the human drivers of climate change now, there is still further change on the way. And my own view is that, yeah, there is natural change going on in the climate, but it's exacerbated by human activity. How could it not be when you've had such a rapid increase in the size of the human population? But whatever you think are the drivers, you can't really dispute the fact that the change is there. You can see it, whether it's the movement of mosquitoes, whether it's the rise in sea level. It is happening. And I set up an organization called Innovation Zero, actually during the pandemic, myself and a couple of colleagues, to see how we can use our ingenuity and our creativity to find solutions, so that we can not disturb the quality of life that people have, but at the same time enter into a decarbonisation agenda. And that's gone very well. We had West Country companies represented at that. We held it at Olympia in 2023. We held it in Olympia again this year, with a 40% increase in the size. A lot of young entrepreneurs trying to find ways that we can tackle the issues around global warming by our own technical capabilities. And it's very likely we're going to be taking the expo to both the United States and Saudi Arabia in the year ahead. So there are lots of things that we can do. But when there'll be people who deny everything. There are people who think Elvis is still alive. There are people who will believe any conspiracy theory going, and there are people who believe that climate change is a hoax. Well, people have to make up their own minds. As a doctor, I was always trained to go on the evidence and go on the science, and that's what I do. Maybe I'm making a mistake in my interpretation, but I really don't think so.
I do believe, Stacey, I do believe that Innovation Zero is also a cross-party initiative, isn't it? There's a lot of it's not something that's just the Conservative Party. There is quite a mix of
it's not party at all.
No.
We set it up as a business project to be able to bring young tech entrepreneurs together with companies and organizations to seed their ideas. And there's no political side to it at all. It isn't attached to any political party. It's an entirely private venture.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a lot of international representation at it this year too, which was great to see. For example, we were very keen to promote what the Moroccans are doing. The Moroccans are using renewable energy, particularly solar and wind power, to develop a totally renewable energy basis for their desalination to help with their agricultural products. And it's that sort of joined up thinking that we were very keen to promote. And I see that going forward as a very sensible contribution. People spend far too much time moaning about the problems rather than trying to bring in solutions. And what we wanted to do was to try to find practical solutions to some of the problems that we face. And you're right, we had pretty much all parties represented and came to the expo this year, which I suppose is my my final point, which is not everything in life is a party political issue. There are some issues that are of greater importance and that will cut across the boundaries because they cut across our boundaries as people and as nations. And we need to have a bit more grown-up conversation.
You said you were going to do 20 minutes. Can I tell you, Liam, we're now at 31 minutes. So thank you very much.
I know, and what you can't see are the signals I'm getting from over here.
Just say one thing before you do shoot off.
Sure.
You've been pushing your book, but you're also mentioned as because you helped out while Portishead right at the beginning. Right at the beginning of our existence. You also helped out a little bit later on when we got involved with potential rewilding. We're not going to go into that tonight, but I'm just going to make sure that you know that in August there's a book coming out called The Great Misconceptions of Rewilding. It's coming out in August, published by Whittles. I'll let you have a copy if you let me have a copy of yours.
I'll give you a signed copy of this one if you give me a signed copy of yours, Chris.
All right. Okay. There's Great Misconceptions. You're in there. Jonathan's in there.
Am I? Good Lord.
Oh, yeah, you're in there as well, mate. So, I'll make sure that you get a copy of that. And obviously, it's not people have already said it's an anti-rewilding. It is not. What we're talking about is proper rewilding.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say,
it's regeneration is such an important concept, and it's very often, I think, hijacked for other reasons. So I'm looking forward to reading it.
We want to say a big thank you to Liam Fox for your time this evening, and we'd like to get you back on the show in whatever form you are in at the end, after the election anyway. So you're always welcome to come back on the show. So that's brilliant. Thank you for your time tonight. Do appreciate that.
Thanks again. It's very nice to see you.
Thank you. Thanks then. Bye.
Bye.
Chris, that was productive.
Very productive.
Yes.
I think that was really good. Hey, whilst we're still live, could you put up the pictures I gave you last time so we can give them all a little story about owls? Can you get hold of them?
Do you know what? Would you believe I deleted them all from the program notes?
No.
I'm sorry. While Portishead show pics, no, they've all gone. I thought we were done with them. So
no, because the story's still there, and it's such a good news story. Well, look, let's not do any spoilers.
No.
But all I'll say is that somewhere in Portishead, there has been a magnificent success with coming together of different factions working together to create an area where a pair of owls have actually bred and where a certain allotment withdrew all of its rodent poisoning. And it has worked. But I'll say no more than that because we'll have to wait. That'll have to wait till another show. And of course, we should say that so far we've had Oscar from the Green Party on. We've had Liam from the Conservative Party on. And thanks to both of them for giving such a brilliant amount of their time. And also, I can tell you now that we've got, at the moment, 2 other candidates that want to come on.
Brilliant.
The emphasis there is the same as Oscar, same as Liam, want to come on. So we're only missing 2 that we can't get hold of at the moment, but we're working on it.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll get the next candidate on. I think I'm going to try for Saturday evening, if possible.
That's fine. Yeah.
And then we'll probably go for something like a Monday evening, which will leave you free to go off and do what you need to do next Thursday.
Well, I'm supposed to be going to the theatre next Thursday, but we'll work that out. I'm just trying to have a look to see if I can find the owl photographs because See what we do, folks, is because we've got the streaming service here. Is when we've finished a show, I just tend to clear everything out, make room, which I think is a Harry Harrison book, isn't it? It was made as a film. The film version of Make Room was Soylent Green. Anyway, that's a completely different conversation. I know. Charlton Heston film, look it up. Is that I just cleared the studio of all the owl photographs from last week. So I do apologise, Chris, and I'm just having a look. We'll find them for the next show. Shall I? What have we got? We can probably run for about another 10 minutes. Shall I bore you all with
You gonna do a ghost story?
You what? Sorry, Chris?
You gonna do a ghost story?
I will do a ghost story afterwards, but I'm just gonna. We did do trail cams
Yes.
month or so back, and I did go and help. It was Sue with her trail cam. So I'm waiting to see what those pictures look, how they've come out. Just going to say, of my trail cam in the garden, I've had plenty of hedgehog activity, which is good. And I'll just show you, this was from last night, early morning. So there is the hog out and about. The one thing you might notice is I'm not putting food out for them now that we're into summer, or summerish. I'm putting fresh water out for them and anything else that wants fresh water, but not food. If they want food, there are plenty of slugs and snails that they can munch on, quite frankly. So so I had the hog in the garden last night. What I haven't seen for a few evenings is my badger.
And can I jump in and say, have you seen any cubs yet? Badger cubs?
No.
That's interesting.
I've only ever we've had badgers plural because I'm just searching through our photographs here. Here we go. I think these are the ones. 3rd of June. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, so we've had badgers. And there's the hog coming up the path to have a drink. And there is one of the badgers. There's 2 hogs here. So that was that's when it all kicked off. They're head to head there. And then one of them goes off, and there's the badger coming up the path. And then he comes up to the one that was involved in the fight and is curious about it and gives it a really good sniff. I think we can sex that one, can't we, Chris? Is that a male or a female badger there?
Looks like a boar. Yeah, it looks like a boar.
Okay. Anyway, there we go. The badger was curious about the hedgehog and then wandered back off into the undergrowth. And then the hedgehog wandered off as well. So there are all these stories that badgers can predate hedgehogs. I'm sure in some circumstances there might be a little bit of negative interaction, but in this particular occasion, nothing untoward. There is the hog wandering off. There's the badger coming back, and then in the morning, juvenile starling. So there we go.
Interactions between species always happen.
Yeah.
And I think we can get very often too hung up on it. And it's a little bit like, for example, I had the other day somebody say to me that there's a lot of red kites about. Now, there is an awful lot of red kites about in North Somerset at the moment. It's a great success story. So anywhere where a farmer is currently cutting grass, what happens is that the roof literally is coming off of the vole population. So the kites and the buzzards come down, the gulls will gather, the crows gather, and they can pick off the voles. That's basically what's happening. So somebody contacted me the other day and said, well, that explains why the small birds are disappearing, because there's too many red kites now. Things happen, but it's what you do have is a thing called predator-prey relationships. And predator-prey relationships keeps things more or less in balance. So when things go out of balance is when you'll start to get the problems. So things do happen. You will get badgers will eat hedgehogs. That's absolutely true. And then you'll have badgers which don't eat hedgehogs, as you're experiencing there. And I have the same thing here as well. So we have hedgehogs and there's badgers passing by, and the two just seem to bypass one another, and there's nothing ever happens. I suppose some of the question would be that if the hedgehog becomes predatable, is there something wrong with the hedgehog? That's the other side of this as well. And I had that with somebody was really worried about the fact that there was a barn owl very close to a rare bat roost, and they were saying that the barn owls will eat the bats. Well, it's, if you watch a barn owl fly and you watch a bat fly, that is some barn owl that's going to catch that bat. And so I would argue that they would catch a bat if the bat was available to them. The bat will only become available to them if there's something wrong with the bat in the first place. So, and that's how things will even themselves out.
Chris, I think we are almost out of time here. So we will be doing more live shows. Like I say, we've got other candidates in the wings to talk to, and we will do a show where we will talk about those owl pictures. Send them to me again. I'll get them all queued up, and yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that another time.
You might have to remind me.
Sorry?
You might have to remind me.
I will. I will. I'll probably find them in the meantime as well. They're probably kicking on the system somewhere. So anyway, a big thank you tonight to Liam Fox for joining us. Big thank you to Chris. Big thank you to everybody who
Thank you to Jonathan.
Tuned in tonight. Excellent. And we will be back as soon as we can with another election candidate.
Whoa, before you go, are you doing ghost stories tonight?
I might be. Why?
Do yourself a plug.
No. That's a separate
Jonathan
thing.
will be live later on doing ghost stories. So go to.
That's a separate thing. Yeah. So we will be back, and keep an eye on the social media feeds, because we will be putting up more trail cam pictures. Sorry about that. And hopefully, Chris, I am going for a walk tomorrow. I'm doing Congsbury to, is it Winscombe? Winscombe, isn't it?
Well, you might bump into some of our Yatwag friends then. Yatton and Congsbury Wildlife Action Group.
Yeah.
25 years since they originally bought what the field that they call the 10 acres. And today I went to check the barn owl nest box with them. And I actually rung or banded, depending if you're watching this from America, 5 owlets. Major success. And that's the biggest brood we've had so far this year. So great success. Just shows you the quality habitats there that Yatwag are producing.
I've got that wrong. It's Congsbury to Rington. I always get Rington and Winscombe all mixed up. Congsbury to Rington we're doing tomorrow, so there will be some wildlife photography taking place. So there we go. Yeah. So big thank you to everybody tonight. We will be back very soon. Keep an eye out. We'll let you know when that is. Until the next time, everybody stay safe. Get out there, enjoy the wildlife as well. So until then.
Count blackbirds. Count blackbirds.
Count blackbirds, indeed. See you later. Bye-bye.